You only cry when I love you. I only lie when I make a sound. Go ahead, muck about. I got my conscience twisted. Pull your hair, make me shout. It's just that you insisted I was good for nothing, like you were onto something. I only lie when I love you. I only cry when I hit the ground. You only cry when I love you. I only lie when I make a sound. I only lie when 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 I love you. I only cry when I hit the ground. In this unit, we are going to talk about some more about safety management and how we can manage workers' compensation with good safety management. The way that works, what is the relevance here? How is safety management related to workers' compensation? Good safety management, we have fewer incidents. Fewer incidents means fewer workers' compensation claims. So that makes perfect sense. Our goal as safety managers, as safety professionals, should be the prevention of incidents, not the management of incidents after they occur. I mean, invariably, we do have incidents that we have to manage. We can't eliminate everything. That's naive, I think, to believe we can eliminate everything and have zero workers' comp claims. It's not going to happen. But we do our best to prevent. And again, that's what we started talking about in Unit 3, using safety management for workers' compensation management. In this unit, we're going to talk more about safety management, focusing more on the hazard identification process and the importance of planning in safety management. Planning safe operations. Now, all of this material, this is going to be a review for most of you. I cover this material in much greater detail in other classes, and for those of you who haven't had those other classes, at the end of this unit, the last video in this unit, I'll talk about, just briefly, I'll outline the classes where all of these topics that we're going to address in this unit are dealt with in greater detail. Again, this is a review. For those of you who haven't had it before, it's going to be a very superficial coverage of the concepts, the methods, the tools, and such that we're going to talk about in this unit and the videos. The textbook, Chapter 3, goes along with what I'm doing in the videos, and it covers some concepts, some tools, some methods that I don't cover in the videos. Why cover it both places? The author does a good job, but there is some overlap between what the author talks about and what I'm talking about in the videos. One of the first things we need to make sure we're doing in our safety management program is making decisions based upon what the data are telling us. We can use data to identify the types of hazards or the types of incidents we're having within the company. Once we identify the types of incidents we're having within the company, then we can develop measures, plans, strategies to prevent those types of incidents. And I'll give you several examples of how we go along here, or as we go along here. We shouldn't go cookie cutter approach to our safety management. We shouldn't have a safety management program that looks like another company's safety management program, because what works for them may not work for us. The types of incidents they're having may not be the types of incidents that we're having. Collecting data, knowing what's going on within your company is important. So we're going to collect in-house data as safety managers, use that information to make decisions. We're also going to look at the industry in general. If we're in the manufacturing industry, we're going to do some industry benchmarking. We're going to identify what types of incidents, generally speaking, occur in the manufacturing industry. What types of incidents occur in the construction industry. And we could even be more specific. What types of injuries or incidents occur in bridge construction, or let's say plastic bottle manufacturing. If we want to look at a specific manufacturing operation or a specific construction operation. Again, the goal here, being data-driven, the goal is to use this information in our decision making. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this since we can't actually have a discussion here, but this is one of those circumstances that we might run into as a safety manager that is not ideal. What is wrong here? What could go wrong? What could be done differently? The biggest problem I see in this setup, you have a wheeled vehicle that's very heavy parked uphill from two workers. This is a perfect scenario for a struck-by incident to occur. Yeah, I'm sure the operator has his foot on the brake, he's taking precautions, but hey, accidents happen. A foot can slip off of a brake. Also, we have the overhead load here. It's not a heavy load, but they've got an overhead load parked on a slope, and there's two workers right in the line of fire to be hit by that piece of equipment. A little bit of planning, a little bit of thought in advance could eliminate these hazards. And that's what we want to do with our planning. Yeah, I'm getting away from data-driven now, but in our planning, which we're going to talk more about here in this unit, in our planning, we want to anticipate what could go wrong and what we can do to prevent it from going wrong. As a sidebar here, this is a professional development note for you. I'm going to be showing you some charts and tables and graphs that were created with Excel. Any professional, whether it's safety management, accounting, finance, whatever profession you're in this day and age, you need to be familiar with Excel. Know Excel. Take an Excel class. If you're not already familiar with Excel, if you're not already proficient with Excel, you should work on developing that proficiency. I've had graduates repeatedly mentioned to me that they wish they had known more about Excel. They wish they'd had more experience with Excel while they were in school, before they got that first job. The more you know about Excel, the more you know about some of the other computer applications, the better off you're going to be professionally. So, also, if you haven't had business statistics yet, I cover Excel and business statistics pretty thoroughly, pretty detailed coverage of Excel and business statistics. So if you need the class, take my business statistics class, and we'll teach you more about Excel. We'll further develop your Excel proficiency in that class. Speaking of Excel, here is a table that was created using Excel. The data that are in this table are from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Change my pen setting here. They're from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and what we have here are 14 years of data for the fatal occupational injuries in construction. Just looking at the construction injury. Now, again, fatal occupational injuries in construction, this is not all of them. These are not all the different types of fatal incidents that occur in the construction industry. What we're getting at here is how we could use data to identify hazards. When I first went to work for Manhattan Road and Bridge, I did an analysis like this and sat down with my bosses, and we talked about what we should be focusing on. First of all, I showed them this table first. I showed them that transportation, falls, slips and trips, contact with equipment or objects, those were the top three types of incidents that resulted in fatalities in construction. And it's pretty well established because we have 14 years of data. The data are pretty consistent over these 14 years. Now, again, this is for all construction. And if we look for all construction, the leading killer of construction workers over this 14-year period was falls, slips, and trips. 35%, almost 36% of all of the fatalities during this period in construction were related to falls, slips, and trips. And that falls, slips, and trips, that's a little bit misleading. We're really talking mostly about falls from elevation. Workers up in the air that fall some distance and hit the ground or hit an object on the lower level. And there are falls on the same level that result in fatalities, but most of these are going to be falls from, say, 6 feet and higher that result in these 4,919 fatalities, in 36%. So when we look at all construction, if you're in the construction industry, you need to focus on falls. That should be high up on your priority list. And we have data backing us up. If we need to make the case to management that we need to be focusing on falls, then we have the data backing us up. Number two, and this is surprising to some, and it's going to be even more surprising here in a second. Number two are transportation-related incidents. During this period, 25.5% of all fatalities were related to transportation incidents in some way. 3,506 fatalities were related to vehicles in some way. That's what we mean by transportation-related. And it's number two when we look at all construction. And this is where I use these data primarily to convince my management that we needed a defensive driving program because of the transportation-related incidents. We were already doing a pretty good job with fall control, but we weren't doing a good job with defensive driving. So I focused on this with my bosses. Hey, we need defensive driving. We need to do more work as far as controlling the risk our employees face when they are in company vehicles. When I was with Manhattan, we had 2 workers killed in traffic accidents when they were in company vehicles. And that's really not that uncommon, as we see from this number here. Third on the list, when we look at all construction, I keep emphasizing all construction for a reason, and you'll see why here in a second. All construction, number 3, contact with equipment or objects. These would be the struck bys, the caught in between types of incidents. This type of incident that I mentioned here that could occur, that would be a struck by. It could even be a caught in between. A struck by is a little bit different. With a struck by, the employee is injured when they are struck by an object. With a caught in between, the employee is injured from being pinched, smushed, crushed between 2 or more objects. Both of those specific types involve contact with equipment or objects. That's why I'm including both of them in this category. During this 14-year period, 18% of fatalities in construction involved contact with equipment or objects. Again, number 1, falls. Number 2, transportation. Number 3, contact with equipment or objects. So again, using this data gives us a head start on what we should be focusing on in our safety management system, wherever we're working, if we're in construction. And you could do the same thing for manufacturing or other industries also. The data are readily available from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. But this is all construction. For the 4th time, all construction. There are different types of construction. And what I did, I showed them this chart first, and then I put together a table that just focused on fatal occupational injuries and highway and bridge construction. That was our specialty. We didn't build high rises. We didn't build school buildings. We built highways and bridges. That was our focus. That was our specific industry segment or sector. When you look just at this sector, highway and bridge construction, the numbers are quite a bit different. We still have 14 years of data represented here, but the numbers, the percentages are quite a bit different. For highway and bridge construction, 68% of all fatalities were related to transportation. Only 6% were related to falls. 18% were related to contact with equipment or objects. So when you look at specific industries, you need to be as industry specific as you can. You need to be as sector specific as you can if you do this kind of analysis as part of your hazard identification efforts within your company. Look at data, but be as specific to what your company does as you possibly can. And this is where I really was able to emphasize the importance of a fleet safety management program. Company had no fleet safety management at all. But when they saw these numbers, plus we'd had the recent fatalities, it was a no-brainer. It wasn't that hard to convince them that we needed defensive driving classes. We needed some other elements of a fleet safety program. Again, 782 fatalities during this 14-year period in highway and bridge were related to transportation incidents. Only 68 were related to falls. 210 were related to contact with equipment or objects. Here's my water. Let's see, what else can I say about this? And this really took them by surprise, especially this column here, because they had placed so much emphasis on falls. There was one year, 2011, where there wasn't a single worker in the highway and bridge construction sector that died from a fall, which that's surprising to a lot of people, but that also shows how much emphasis is placed on fall protection in highway and bridge construction. You're working 150 feet up in the air on a bridge deck, then companies know how to use fall protection in those circumstances. Another thing I should mention about transportation, these transportation accidents, not all of them were highway accidents in company vehicles. A lot of these transportation-related fatalities that occur in this segment of the construction industry are workers who are struck by vehicles passing through the work zone. They're doing their job. They are minding their own business. A car comes through the work zone, not paying attention, runs through the cones and strikes the workers. There was one company, I talk about this a lot in the OSHA 30 class, but I'll mention it here because it's relevant. I did some work with a company out of Oklahoma City. They lost 2 workers in one incident where a driver was passing through a work zone. They had a medical emergency. I don't remember if it was a stroke or what it was, a seizure, but medical emergency caused them to lose control of their vehicle. They ran off the road in the work zone and struck 3 workers, killing 2 of those workers. So transportation should be your number one if you're in the highway and bridge construction industry. And again, you can do this in manufacturing or other industries as well. Just using this as an example of how we can use data to drive our decisions and drive our emphasis areas within our safety management system. What are the top 3 for your industry? And that's where you would focus. And there we're getting a little bit over into risk assessment, the risk assessment process. But I spent a lot of time on this, so let me speed it up a little bit. And here, I've got some more slides here that summarize this. Another thing that we can do with data is show trends over time. That's what we have here with this particular line graph. This was the first company I worked for. This shows their injury rate going back to 1981. And we show how in this line graph, we show how it increased gradually but dramatically over an 8-year, 9-year period, and then it slowly started to come down. And this was the period, I came in about right here as their safety director. And we saw some decrease, we saw some ups and downs, but generally speaking, once they went with a full-time safety director, their rates were much lower than they had been before. A couple of couple of concepts that I want to define for you, concepts that you will run across in your career. First concept is lagging indicator. A lagging indicator is what we call a reactive measure of performance, like the rate of injuries or the rate of fatalities. A leading indicator, proactive measure of safety prevention efforts, like a measure of our training program, measure of how many inspections or observations we're making, a measure of our risk assessment procedures, and so on. Here is a content analysis of all the injuries at my second company. One of the first things I did, I wanted to know what kind of injuries specifically were happening at this company. So I rounded up 4 years of injury data. Now, not all of these were serious injuries. I wanted data on every type of incident that occurred to get a better understanding of what we really needed to focus on. And after this simple analysis, again, this was set up in Excel, this simple analysis showed me that the number one type of incident for this company during this 4-year period were incidents that involved a falling or flying object. A lot of falling objects in the bridge construction industry. So that's the type of incident that occurs most often. So that's going to be a big focus in the safety system that I'm helping to develop. Number 2, improper PPE. And an example of an injury where the employee didn't have proper PPE was an employee was wading around in wet concrete without rubber boots. So we're going to focus on falling object control. We're going to make sure that employees have the gear they need and they know when and how to use that gear. Tied for number 2 was overexertion and lifting. Over a 4-year period, there were 17 of these cases. We're also going to emphasize that. These in this 1, 2, 3, 4. This what we're creating here is a priority list. What we need to focus on first. What is most important to focus on within the company. As far as overexertion and lifting, an example incident, one of the incidents that occurred, an employee was trying to pick up a generator and move it by himself. When I say move it by himself, he was trying to pick it up and put it in the back of a pickup by himself. And he blew his guts out. Hernia. Which blew his guts out. That's a crude way of saying that he suffered a hernia from that effort to move the generator by himself. So we're focusing on falling objects. We're focusing on getting the right equipment. We're focusing on proper lifting, team lifting. These were emphasis areas in my first year with this particular company. Slips and trips, number 3. Sharp edges, a lot of cuts. Minor injuries, but they can still be expensive. They can still cost the company in a variety of ways, and they're also not good for the employee to cut their finger. And number 5, equipment use. Employee checking grade was ran over by a bulldozer. Suffered multiple fractures, but he survived. And the note below, and I don't actually have the note here. The note below was in my original report that I submitted to management. The note was about, even though it was only number 5 on the list, we need to pay close attention to equipment accidents, because equipment accidents, heavy equipment accidents, a lot of times they end up as a fatality, as a serious injury. So it needs to be up higher toward the list also, along with transportation, along with falls. Notice during this period, there was only 1 fall from elevation during the 4-year period. And the employee in this example, or in this case, was lucky to be alive. He did fall 35 feet. And he was able to walk away with a broken arm. Very fortunate that he survived that incident. The sad part of that story that same employee was killed a few months later in Missouri. Wasn't part of the company. In fact, he had ended up in jail somehow in Missouri, and got into a fight in jail and was killed in jail. The joy of construction workers. Construction workers are a different breed, and that's one example of it. But if you go into a company and they're not keeping records like this might be something you would do. And you're not doing it to show off, or you're doing it to find out what you need to focus on. You want your decisions about your safety management system to be driven by the data. You need to be data driven. You don't want to waste all of your time, or you don't want to emphasize something that maybe isn't that important. You have limited time, you have limited resources, so you want to knock the hell out of the most important stuff as soon as possible. You want to kick its butt so you can have the greatest impact on injury reduction, fatality reduction in your company. I could talk all day about some of these incidents. That's a good one here. Work zone traffic. Employee jumped a barrier wall into live traffic. He ended up being hit by a semi and knocked backwards back over the barrier wall. Very fortunate to be alive. That's also one of the big ticket items. Transportation related, equipment related, and falls, I call those big ticket items. You got to take care of the big ticket items. And the big ticket items, those are the types of incidents where one mistake can immediately become a fatality, where there's a lot of energy involved, where there's a lot of force involved, potentially. Got to take care of those. Then after those big ticket items are squared away, then you focus on some of these other types of injuries. The improper PPE, falling, flying, rolling objects. And one thing, I don't want to be misleading here. It's not like you just focus on one thing at a time. You have priorities. You're focusing on all these things at the same time. But you're placing more emphasis on, say, one versus the other based upon the potential severity or based upon the frequency of the incidents. Main point here is to impress upon you the importance of using data, using information to make your decisions. And here is a case study in what we're talking about. The last company I worked with, Kiewit, excellent safety program. They have a very unique take on pocket knives and pocket knives in the workplace. And when I share this with people, most people in Oklahoma, they raise their eyebrows and shake their head and think that's kind of crazy. But sometimes if you want to prevent injuries, you got to do things that other people think are kind of crazy. But here's what we did at Kiewit. A review of company incidents. This is a review of company incidents. Kiewit did a similar review. This was not Kiewit. This was Manhattan. At Kiewit, there was a review of company incidents like that, and they found that pocket knives were involved in over half of the lacerations involving company personnel. Half of the lacerations, half of the cuts involving Kiewit employees involved a pocket knife. So what did Kiewit do? And they did the right thing. And management supported it. Management was behind it. A lot of companies aren't going to be behind these types of policies. A lot of upper management are going to think that's crazy. We can't force our employees to follow these policies. But here are some of the policies that were developed because of all the lacerations that involve pocket knives. No pocket knives on the job in use unless approved by the project manager or safety manager. No pocket knives on Kiewit jobs. If there was a cutting task that needed to be performed, you had to use what we call a safety cutter. We had a list of what were considered safety cutters. Those safety cutters included an electric-powered rotary cutter with a sharp blade that was guarded, much safer than a traditional pocket knife. Another example of a safety cutter was a self-retracting box cutter. Box cutters that wouldn't retract automatically, they weren't allowed. But if it was self-retracting, if it was spring-loaded, and you had to hold your thumb to keep the blade extended, and when you remove your thumb, the blade retracted automatically, those were okay. This was a fireable offense. If employees were violating these policies, they could be fired. Again, I know it sounds extreme, but when you're a company as large as Kiewit and you see this pattern, proactive companies take action and do what needs to be done. And while I was at Kiewit, I did not hear of any employee suffering a cut or other laceration from a pocket knife. Before Kiewit, two pretty serious, at least two that I can recall, pretty serious cuts involving employees and their own pocket knives. One guy had to go to the emergency room. He had cut himself so severely. Actually, in both cases, now that I recall, both cases, employees had to go to the emergency room and get stitched up. There were probably several more that we never heard about because they weren't that serious. Just more minor lacerations that didn't require stitches. So this is an example of using the data to create policy to prevent injuries. Even though it may seem extreme to some of you, the good companies are willing to do this. The good companies understand that this is how they can be more successful. And Kiewit is, again, over 20,000 employees. They do about $12 billion in revenue a year. They've been around since 1884. They know what they're doing when it comes to building things, but also when it comes to safety. And I first learned about this policy when I was working with Kiewit as a subcontractor on a job in Texas. And at first I thought, man, that's kind of crazy. And then the safety manager on that project explained it to me. Oh, well, that makes sense. It makes perfect sense. And it reminded me of some incidents within our company that had occurred. And this policy at Kiewit, this is one of the reasons I wanted to work for Kiewit. I wanted to work for a company that took safety this seriously. And there aren't a lot of them out there. I would say 90% of construction companies out there are not going to address this, are not going to be this proactive as what we saw here. Another source of data that you can use, and I am going to speed it up now and try not to have so many stories. Loss runs from your insurance company. Your insurance company that you're using, they collect data on all your losses, the cost of claims, workers' compensation, and other types of loss. It includes the reserves, which is money that's put back to cover the future cost associated with the claim. They track incidents over time. Just a valuable source of information that can be used in the decision-making process within your company. Also help you identify the types of hazards that you need to be focused on as well. And here's an example of a loss run. And a lot of the information is blacked out, but as a safety manager, eventually, maybe not in your first year at the entry level, but eventually you'll probably be involved in reviewing the loss history for your company, the loss runs, meeting with the loss prevention specialists, and reviewing what's happened in the last 6 months or a year, and then coming up with a plan to prevent those types of incidents in the future. Incident investigation is another source of information. We talked about this in the last video, but we want to identify the causes, the root causes to prevent in the future. It also gives us a better understanding of the types of incidents that maybe are the most prevalent, types of incidents that we need to focus on in our preventative measures. The internal auditing and monitoring that we conduct with a company, also discussed in the last unit. This is also a source of data on which we can base our decisions. We're just watching work, we're looking at problems, we're observing, monitoring for problems that need to be corrected. And we're documenting this, we're keeping records of this. Good companies will periodically review their auditing reports, their inspection reports, and they will identify any trends that are occurring, that are showing up in those reports. And based upon those trends, they may tweak their safety management system. For example, if there are a lot of workers who are having smash injuries, or no, that's a bad example. That's a bad example because we're talking about injuries. Let's say there are from our monitoring efforts, we notice a lot of workers who are forgetting to wear their safety glasses properly when they're using a quickie saw. Quickie saw is a type of saw used in the construction industry, also called a demo saw, also called a cutoff saw. But maybe we notice that there are a lot of workers that aren't using their eye protection properly when they're using that type of saw. We see that recurring time after time after time on different projects. Well, then that becomes a trend that we need to take action on. It becomes what we would call an actionable item or actionable information. You can't just ignore it. You use that information as part of your continual improvement program. We talked a lot about continual improvement in the last unit. Good companies are always looking to be better, and good companies to get better are looking at their data. All right, I'm going to end this video here. When we come back, we're going to talk more specifically about planning for safety, and I'll talk more about this play on words when we come back in the next video.